Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in. My name is EJ Quanabens. This is the part 2 of the previous video that was posted regarding regalia making with EJ Quanabens, with an emphasis on girls' traditional style dance starter outfits. This video is going to cover a few topics that relate to measurements, pattern making. Although we did speak about pattern making briefly, or the selection of patterns, we'll talk about pattern making as well in this segment. Applique shapes and all that goes along with appliquing and what is appliquing. Fabric selection, understanding fabrics, the do's and don'ts of fabric selection. And ribbon work, designing, and all the helpful hints that go along with ribbon making. And then actually getting into the construction and what does that all mean. So first off, measurements and pattern making. In the previous launch that we had, I made reference to measurements. There were a number of you that were asking, well, what kind of measurements do I need? Some believe that there were 8 measurements. I think I only gave like really 5, I think. So let's go through that right now at this time. So when we're doing measurements and when you were getting into purchasing your fabric, purchasing your pattern, you're going to have some measurements that you could be mindful of and tweak your pattern as you were laying it on the fabric. But I'm getting ahead of myself right now. So let's just talk about measurements. First off, you just need to go to the dollar store and purchase a measuring tape, okay? And I like to use inches, whereas other people like to use centimeters. So whatever measurement you're using, be consistent with it, because I know some people who place orders with me, they send me their measurements, but it happens to be in centimeters when I deal with inches, and they want, say, a 42 length skirt, and they send me the measurements, and I know the difference. It's centimeters are giving me, which means this would equate to a child's skirt. But again, be mindful that we're working in inches rather than centimeters. And if you choose centimeters, then know that other people do also work in inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to measure the outside of the sleeve, outside of the shoulder, to the outside of the shoulder. So you can't be measuring yourself because your measurements will be inaccurate. If you measure yourself and the measurements are inaccurate, then even the slightest quarter of an inch will be off, and it won't fit and won't fit properly on you. So get somebody to measure you. That's the first rule of thumb. Measure on the outside of the shoulder, directly across the front to the other side of the outside shoulder. That's measurement number 1. Measurement number 2, outside of the shoulder. So when I go like this, right here, the outside of the shoulder, to how far you want the sleeve to go. So in these cases over here, these examples over here, I believe there were 9 inches. So you would measure 9 inches. But keep in mind that you have your seam allowance, which is a quarter of an inch. And you also have, I'm not sure if you can see this, but in this example here, I folded the fabric over. It's about a half an inch. So we have a half an inch of a folding fabric. We have a quarter of an inch for the seam allowance. That's 3/4 of an inch. So that would be a 9 3/4 measurements for the sleeve. If you wanted to make it longer, then just make it longer and record that, but just be mindful that you have your seam allowance and your folding aspect of your fabric. Unless you're going to be using bias tape, or unless you're going to be doing a facing that won't minus your measurements. So just be mindful of that as well. So that's measurement 2. Measurement 3 is going to be from the outside of the shoulder to how long you want this dress to be. That is where the hemline of the dress will be. So in this example here, here's the outside of the shoulder, and the bottom in inches is 29 inches. Okay, so again, end of the shoulder to how long you want it, and in this sample of the brown dress, it's 29 inches. That's measurement number 3. Measurement number 4 is usually this part here. It's the cleavage part, okay? Now, when we have jingle dresses or dresses for our girls, this is not about bringing down like so to show cleavage. That's not what these outfits are intended for, okay? That's streetwear. And so in traditional outfits, it's not about showing cleavage or anything like that. These are not sexualized outfits. These are garments that are used for traditional ceremonies and practices in dance. So just be mindful of that. So I want this measurement to, again, how long I want the dress to go. So in this case, I would measure, if you could see here, measure from here, the cleavage, down to the bottom. And in this case, it happens to be 25.5. Okay? Now, I want the measurement in the back, so that would be measurement number, what was that number? 1, 2, 3, 4. Measurement number 5 will be the exact same thing, the back of the neck to the length to the bottom of the hem. That's measurement number 5. Oh, and I did mention in the previous launch the hip and waist. Okay, all I need you to understand is that wherever your belly button is, 1 inch above that is your waistline. 1 inch below the belly button is your hip line. And it's important that you understand those placements, because when you lay your pattern down on your fabric, you just have to understand the positioning of it. And if it happens to be a more curvaceous person, then you have to keep that in consideration. And if there is a more curvaceous person, I tend to add a little bit more just so that it's not snug. So there's more wiggle room and movement and that sort of stuff. Okay, so those are your measurements. There's 5 measurements, and if we're going to add the hip and the waist, and that would be measure number 6 and measurement number 7. So I think in the previous launch somebody mentioned there was 8 measurements. That was number 7. Oh, I know. There was one here I mentioned underneath the shoulder. I usually go 4.5 to 5 inches. And that's usually the measurements that helps with the guide for the hip and the waist. But that's not really a measurement that we need to be mindful of for these particular outfits right now. Okay, so that's measurements. The next issue is pattern making. So as I mentioned in a previous video, you need to create or purchase a pattern, a pre-made pattern from a fabric store, A-line dress pattern that's usually a sundress that has sleeves. And then we can always extend it. So one thing that I oftentimes mention to people, whether you're making a starter outfit for a little girl, or if you're making an adult dress for a woman, or a jingle dress, or a shawl dress, or whatnot, you should be purchasing a pattern that is 1 size larger than your typical size. So if you happen to be a size 14, you're going to cut out the pattern that reflects a size 16. Patterns go in 2-inch increments. Okay, again, stay away from the patterns from the European patterns because they tend to fit a lot more smaller. So if you were to get a size 14, it actually will fit to a size 10 or 12. So again, you have to understand how patterns work. But in northwestern Ontario and in the western side of the continent, you need to select patterns that, as I mentioned, Easy 1, 2, 3, Burdock, or Simplicity. Those are sufficient patterns that you could use, so long as they're A-line pattern dresses. Okay, so that is pattern. We can create our own pattern, but using a pre-made pattern is just as easy. I think somebody had mentioned something about pajamas, using a pajama pattern. You can, as long as it's not a stretchy pattern, a stretchy fabric. Okay, because if you're using a stretchy fabric, then it's not going to be the perfect fit that you want. Okay, so you can take, for example, a shirt. This is a fitted shirt, so you can take the seams off, open them up, iron them, and flatten them out, and then add maybe 1/4 of an inch to 1/2 an inch all around the outline of the pattern, and then you could extend this part as well out to an A-line pattern. You can do that as well too. So you can take existing garments and take them apart, so long as they're not too expensive, and modify that. Okay, but if you're new to this, you want to be able to use a correct pattern that is perfectly mathematically calculated for your size. If you're an advanced sewer, then taking a shirt and a dress and that sort of stuff is something that you can do, but you'll know how to manipulate that particular piece moving forward, because it's an easy task that you're well aware of in terms of how to work measurements. The other issue I want to talk about is applique shape and development. So if we're going to make designs of flowers, for example, on this dress, you would have to get some Bristol board from the dollar store, and create a stencil, draw it up perfectly, it's stiff, and you would trace these onto what we'll get into a little bit later about heat and bond and fabrics and how that works. And you'll trace this out, and then you'll position it and iron onto your garment wherever you want to place it. Okay, but the first step is that you have to get Bristol board and create your stencils. In this case, here is another floral print, floral stencil. There's another floral stencil. Here's the one that I love using, is the tulip type of stencil. The leaf, I took a picture of a bear, okay? Another flower. All of these are stencils. So whatever stencils or whatever design you want to make, you have to create stencils out of the Bristol board and have them all cut out and ready to go. That's your stenciling, okay? The other issue is fabric selection. Now, fabric selection is going to be very key. I'm going to suggest moving forward for these particular tasks is to use cotton. Now, cotton comes in 3 gradients. We're going to use the premium cotton. Sometimes you can use Swedish cotton. Swedish cotton is this is more like a medium to a premium grade. It's a little heavier. If you use broadcloth, that is a very low grade. It's almost transparent, so you can use that, but just be mindful that there are gradients of fabric, and you have to understand the different kinds of fabrics to use and what is best for the garments that we're going to be working on. In this case, it's going to be cotton fabrics. Okay, cotton fabrics oftentimes come in 36, 45, 60, 72 inch width. You'll only need a 36, maybe a 45 inch at max with fabric to create these garments. Okay, so that's fabric selection. I do have a fabric over here called Liquid Lame. It's a very airy, has a lot of movement, it stretches. It's not something that I would recommend for this particular style of dance because it's more used for fancy shawl dancing. This one here is, it'll hold itself, it'll be easy to maintain and wash, and I'll have a lot of years thereafter for its usage. So just be mindful that fabric selection is going to be very key, and I think we're going to focus solely on cotton moving forward for this project here today. Ribbon work and designing and helpful hints. I will show you that as we move forward and getting into the task. I'll show you how we've done, how I've done this, and the supplies that we need, and how to produce lines nice and straight, and how to sew them up as well. So I'll get into that in the demos that I do moving forward during the next upcoming weeks. In terms of homework, again, pattern. You'll need a pattern, pre-made pattern, simplicity, easy 1, 2, 3, or burdock pattern. One size larger than your typical pattern, A-line summer dress pattern, ideally with sleeves. That's what you need to purchase first off. Second thing is you might want to go to the dollar store. It's cheap. You shouldn't break the bank doing this. You need a measuring tape. You'll need push pins that have the plastic bulbs in it. Touch the pins to make sure that they are sharp, not dull. If they are dull, they will tear and create a bleed in your fabric. We don't want that. Okay? You'll need a pencil crayons. You'll need perhaps a pen, a straight edge ruler. Get a notebook to make all your notes in. Grab 2 pairs of scissors, one for paper, one for fabric, and make sure you label them, because if you use your fabric paper on paper, it'll dull it very quickly. If you use a dollar store scissors and you use it solely for just fabric, it will last for quite some time. Okay. You'll also need threads. Gutermann, Coban, or Coates thread. Cotton thread is really great. And you'll need interfacing, which is a heavyweight interfacing, not to be mixed up with the interfacing that's used for beading. This is used for garments for the collars and the cuffs. It's called interfacing. Pellon or Crafter's Choice is what Fabricland will call them. And it's a one-sided fusible, comes in black or white. You'll need your cotton fabric. You need 1.5 yards of that color selection. Ribbons, double satin line ribbons is what I would recommend. You don't want to purchase any ribbons from the dollar store or anything like that, because they tend to fade, bleed, and melt when you iron them on. So those are your supplies. Hopefully that you can purchase those supplies. And next class, we will cover everything that we need to cover in terms of creating the cutouts for your measurement of your pattern and for your actual fabric moving forward. Okay? It's a crash course. It's a quick review. So hopefully this was useful to you. Feel free to leave comments and questions and whatnot, and we'll move forward and we'll try to get to those questions and comments at a later date. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be safe, everybody. Miigwech.